So, solid design for digital trust. I hope I can take you with me in the story of how wonderful it is today, the world we live in, with all these personalized experiences, where I don't have to think about which music I need to discover, which book I need to read next, which series or movie I have to watch, because I give all my data away to just get those great personalized experiences. How wonderful is that? But do we trust those companies with who we are sharing our data? Have you ever thought about what they are doing with your data? And this is what we need to talk about tonight. How do we create trust in this world where we share our data? How do we make sure that privacy is secured and safeguarded when we are sharing all those data with all those companies just to get some value in return? What happened to trust? Well, long before digital was a thing, we already shared data just to get better experiences. We did it in phone surveys, we filled out some papers, and then they adjusted experiences, and we just get a better shopping experience in the supermarket or whatever. But then the big tech companies arrived, and they said, okay, data, that's quite interesting. We can personalize experiences, but we can do much better with it. In fact, we can sell this data to other companies, and this is something great, because then they started to collect all this data about us. They followed us around the internet, and then we got all those personalized targeting, and we were wondering, how do they know? What did they do? We weren't aware of that until some big scandals leaked out in the press. I think you all know Cambridge Analytica. They used all this Facebook data of users, sold it to a company, and then they manipulated the elections in the US. And it's not only them. This is just one big famous example. There are many, many other examples. So Target, for example, they figured out a teen daughter was pregnant even before the parents knew it. And the father, they got all this advertisement on the name of his daughter for baby supplies, and he was wondering, why does my daughter of 16 get all these advertisings? She is too young to get pregnant. Well, in fact, he had to apologize to Target because afterwards it appeared she was really pregnant. So the trust got a bit eroded, and we were thinking, this is really painful that our data is used in such a way. So when we are talking about trust issues in the online world, it's often related to a data issue. Something is wrong with how they gather our data, how they process our data, how they track us. And when we think about what is trust then, in fact, how can we make sure that we safeguard that trust? And this is something that Brené Brown is using. Trust is choosing to make something that is really important to you, vulnerable to the actions of others. So I'm giving you my personal data to a company or a service I'd like to interact with, and I hope they do it for my benefit and not theirs. But that didn't turn out that way exactly. So we discovered that, in fact, gathering data had a lot of power. It gives you power, it gives you the power to control the life of people, to create great experiences, but also bad experiences. We weren't aware of that. We didn't know who is collecting my data, what are they doing with my data, with who are they sharing my data. And not only we got aware of this, regulation did also. And from different different countries looked at how can we protect data, because data is important. It has value, it can improve experiences, but we should protect it. We should protect the users, but we should also allow companies to innovate, to create better experiences. Three different approaches. I need to take you with me in some legal regulations to really capture what it means these regulations are trying to do and how it impacts our work as designers. Because more and more applications, we are dealing with data. And if we want to create trustful experiences, honor the users, then we need to know how we can deal with the data, how we can interact and safeguard the trust of these people. Three different approaches. If we look at the United States, there's a very company-centered approach. So there, the companies have the power. By default, you accept that your personal data is processed. So you really need, as a user, to opt out and say, no, I don't want to. They also don't have one general law that regulates everything around personal data. So it's really little initiatives, soft regulations that allow around health data, around data of children, and then you have some state regulations like California, who has inspired regulation on European GDPR. A second approach is China. We all know China, personal data protection, not such a great story, but in 2021, they installed a regulation which is called PIPL, or People Information Protection Regulation, and they inspired that regulation on the European GDPR. They also said you need an opt-in. The customer needs to consent to the use of his personal data. You would think, wow, China, very, very, very good. But what's the little trick about that? They also say that the state can access the data of the user, which it makes it government center. For the sake of national security, we need to access the data of the user. So this is a second approach. And then we have the European approach, which is important for us designing in Europe for European companies and European users. There we have a more human-centered approach. The human is at the center. It's also requiring an active consent of the customer or the user. You need to opt in for your data to be collected. And it's been regulated by a couple of regulations. It's a bit a pity that a part of the screen falls off this big screen, but hey. We need to talk about three important things when we are dealing with data in Europe. It's the GDPR, it's e-privacy directive, and it's Schrems. First of all, I think you're all very accustomed to GDPR and what it means. So it's human, it's a fundamental right to protect your data. It needs an active and informed consent of the customer. So you need to say, yes, you can use my data for processing. And it pertains to personal data. Personal data, what does it mean? You have direct data that identifies you, one person, for example, your national number. I can say if I have this number, I know it's you. Then you have indirect data, which most of the time needs a combination of data, for example, your last 3 recent locations, and then that can help me to identify you. And then you have the category of sensitive data, which can only be used if you are authorized by the law. And what is sensitive data? It's everything that is about health, it's about your religious beliefs, your political beliefs, union membership, ethnicity, and so on. So this is really a specific category of data, and you cannot process it if you are not, if you don't have a legal basis for that. In GDPR, 8 rights have been defined. You get, as a user, 8 rights to exercise on the data that is collected about you. First of all, you have the right to be informed. So they have to tell you they are collecting your data. You should know that. You have the right to access that data, to see which data they hold about you. The right to portability means that you have to be able to download that data, take it with you, and upload it in another server, other application, other software. The right to rectification, so if you see that there are any errors in the data that is held about you, then you have the right to correct that, to ask correction of that data. You have the right to restrict processing, so asking to restrict less data about you. The right to erasure, or more commonly known as the right to be forgotten. So in some, you cannot ask the government to forget about you, but other companies, you can ask, hey, maybe you should stop collecting data about me. You have the right to object to the processing of your data. And finally, you have the right to oppose against automated decision making, and that means all the data that is used for marketing purposes, but also behavior design, even by means of AI and machine learning. So really important to know when you are handling with data, these are the rights that you need to respect for the users. A second law is the e-privacy directive, I think better known as the cookie law, and the famous invasion of cookie prompts all over the internet and all those windows that you need to click away before you can really go to what you came for. It pertains to the cookies and every form of tracking. That also means the Google Analytics and all other tools that are analyzing your clicking behavior around the internet. It requires you to inform users about the fact that you are using cookies and what each function of these cookies is. It also requires you to foresee the option to give consent, but also to withdraw consent afterwards at any time. And they make a difference in their rules about session and permanent cookies, essential first-party cookies and non-essential third-party cookies. So that is everything around the cookies that you need to know and tracking. And then finally, you have Max Schrems. What did he do? He's an Austrian lawyer and privacy activist. And there exists something as the EU-US Privacy Shield that really allows to exchange data between the US and Europe. We all use those cloud platforms and SaaS services, MailChimp, Google Analytics, whatever, Facebook. And what did he found out? That when I use these services, my data is exchanged with the US. It is stored in the US databases, but national security can access my data. And that is in violation with GDPR. So thanks to that guy, he made this whole privacy shield invalidated. That also, maybe you've heard it in the news, why Austria forbids the use of Google Analytics, why in Germany you can no longer use MailChimp, etc. This is all thanks to Max. Biden came to Europe and he started a new agreement, work on a new agreement, so we can really exchange our data between US and Europe. So this is really the legal context we have to deal with, or we have to take into account when designing interfaces, building applications, and so on. Okay. And we have an internet issue. Okay.
De livestream zal dan ook niet werken, dat is het voordeel.
My question is related to all of these regulations because I've never encountered that, first of all, somebody reads the privacy policy. It never happens. And you have to scroll all the way down. I'm talking in terms of UX, so you have to scroll all the way down to accept, and nobody just do that. And is there any direction in terms of UX to really put these, like, hey, we're going to do this with your data, we're going to do this with your data, and if you want more details, it's down there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's coming.
Oh.
They're working on making that clearer.
Well, it's up to us. Yeah. We as designers should take our responsibility in empowering our users to exercise their rights on their data. So this is really important. Digital trust by design, what can we do as designers? We have now all these regulations, but did it help? Did it give back trust to the customers? Haha. If we look at the numbers of Digimeter of last year, well, not so well, in fact, because you can see 72% has still no idea what companies are doing with their data. because they don't read it, probably. They don't take the time to read it because it's lengthy and cumbersome to do so. 73% is bothered by the fact that companies are not transparent about the way, what they do with the data. And in general, 63% is still worried about online privacy in general. Why is that? You say, okay, we have GDPR, so maybe this should be all possible. But what GDPR just requested was foreseeing a consent mechanism. They didn't say, hey, designer, make it suck. But we didn't do a great job. It's not us, it's also the companies that said, okay, but can we just use the deceptive patterns to get the user just click and then move on? So is this a good example then of asking active consent? Not so good. There's only one button. You can only accept, am I transparent with you about what I'm doing with your data? Is something explaining me what they are collecting, who they will be sharing it, why they are collecting it? No. And just after the installation of GDPR in 2018, a study revealed for the 5,000 most popular websites in Europe that less than 5% had an option to decline cookies in an obvious or less obvious way. That's quite a problem. Luckily, we moved on. I don't know if you can see this example. Is this a good way of asking an active, informed consent? Yeah, no, not so good. You can only accept to get advertisement, personalized, less personalized, or you have to really good eyes to see that somewhere below there's a small link that says if you don't agree, click here. And then you had to write an email or something to say I don't want to get advertisement in my app. Is this a good example then? No, why not?
Because it doesn't allow me to choose which. I have to go through more steps.
Voilà. You have to, it's better. It's a better approach, but it's not the best because it's really obstructing interaction with the site. What it's doing good is that you have two clear options. You can reject, you can accept, or you can adjust your settings. But yeah, it's a cookie wall, and that's not great. So we've seen a lot of deceptive patterns. If you're choosing a tool to act with cookies or designing a cookie banner yourself, what do you need to pay attention to? Well, first of all, this was a really nice example. I did the short one of the 10 miles, so I encountered it and I say, oh, finally, I found an example that is really doing great. So it didn't block out the whole site with a cookie banner. It gave you can see it, but the pop-up has three options: accept, reject, or adjust. And when I click adjust, it's really categorized cookies. So it's a nice experience. And I could use the website even without interacting with the cookie banner. And then you set it. You have those lengthy privacy policies, because this is the next step. This is cookies, but also you have the obligation to inform people about what you're doing with their data. And that is the privacy policy or the privacy notices where you're doing that kind of thing. Well, in 2019, the Washington Post and the New York Times, they did a little research and they went through a couple of privacy notices of well-known apps and websites. And what did they find out? From the apps, it counted like 1 million words you get to go through if you read all the privacy policies of your apps, of the website. It was really incomprehensible. So it exceeded the college reading level, which means for the US that most of the Americans were left out. It means that they could not understand what was written in these privacy notices, which is a problem. Even in Flanders, 1 in 7 adults has low literacy, which means that it has difficulties in reading, in writing, in finding and understanding information, especially online. So if they are having to deal a lot more with digital interactions and we are confronting them with privacy policies that are unreadable, we are not creating honest experiences for our users. What can we do then? There are some best practices. We can put some design love and some design magic on those privacy policies and not leave it to the legal department to deal with it. First of all, think about a language. Make it clear, make it concise, short sentences. It will make it readable for every user. And if your application is aimed at children, then children should be able to read that privacy policy as well. And there's also some options, layout. From a visual point of view, we can make them more readable, create sections, short paragraphs, use headings, use a table of contents, just help the customer through that privacy policy. Show him, this is a really good example of the BBC, who really shows with bullets, with short paragraphs, what they are doing with your data in a comprehensible language. And also sometimes we need to adjust and update our privacy policy. So when you send out the mail, we've updated our privacy policies, click here and read it. Maybe you could add an additional layer and tell them this is what it changed and this is what the changes mean, and not go find out what we changed. So this is an example of CatNet, who is aimed at children. So what did they do? They added a video explaining what is data doing, what does it mean to have a cat profile on their website. They created subsections where they really break up the information in small parts and get the user through data and cookies. In our relationship with applications, you have the first time encounter, the first date, the cookie policy and the privacy notices. But sometimes, after a while, you need to make some adjustments. And then you think, what do they do again with my data? Maybe I need to adjust some settings. So I need a place where I can do it easily. So when you're designing applications, also think about that story from, okay, we gather that first consent, but what do we do once you want to interact with your given consents? So by designing good setting hubs or privacy hubs, we can create nice experiences. This is an example of LinkedIn, which I thought did it quite a good job in comparison to Facebook a couple of years. I don't know if you remember, where you had these how-to guides that helped you to put your settings in place, because Facebook did some changes to privacy settings and it was all the mess and nobody understood how they had to protect themselves. This is also a great example of exporting your data, data portability. How can you take it with you, and how LinkedIn is showing you which kind of data you want to take with you, what do you want to download. And sometimes our relationship ends with a product, we break up. And also then we need to think about what do we do with that data and how transparent are we with our users of what we are doing. This is an example of Smashing Magazine, where they say, okay, it's sorry to see you go, but hey, you know, we have some data about you, and after 7 days, we will erase that data. If you want to take things with you, now is your time. Here is a download link. Take it with you. So these are really in the whole journey of a customer, in the whole interaction life cycle a customer has with an application. There are different times and moments where we need to think about data. How can we empower users to manage that data? And also a good rule of thumb, only ask what is needed, not just ask as much as we can, and then we will see what we can do with it in the future. That's not a good practice.
Yes, I'm going to talk about a new era of digital trust that is coming up. But before, we need to zoom out, and we need to look at the data problem that we still have today, because despite the cookie law, despite the GDPR law, which Stéphanie explained already, we still have a data problem in our society. Data is a valuable resource, and data is needed for economic growth, for innovation, but also for prosperity in general. And the problem we have today with data is that data is stuck in what we call data silos. Think about applications, think about CRM applications, databases. The data is really stuck in such a data silo, and that has, of course, a lot of disadvantages. For example, because the data is isolated in such a silo, we have a lot of duplicate data across those silos, which has, of course, an impact on the data quality. But it's also difficult to exchange data between data silos. If you're lucky, there is an API, but then again, there's no standardization. So if you want to integrate with an API, it's complex, it's costly, it takes a lot of time. And then, of course, in those silos of those companies, of those applications, there is also sensitive data, like personal data or company secrets. And yeah, we do not trust other companies or other people with that information. So some data, we would like to keep them in those silos. But luckily, of course, we have a solution for our data problem, and that's, of course, more legislation. We're at the dawn of this new era of digital trust, and the European Union has created 2 new laws for it, the Data Act and the Data Government Act. The European Union today is a single market with freedom of transportation of goods, services, and people across borders. And with these 2 new laws, the European Union also wants to create a single market for data, allowing collaboration, allowing data exchange across borders. And the European Union wants to create such a single market for data by creating data spaces. And a data space is basically an environment, a space per sector. So think about finance, health, mobility, where each player can freely exchange data without depending on each other. So for example, if you have a data space for mobility, all players in this data space, like for example, public transport companies or shared mobility companies or even traffic information organizations or car manufacturers can share their data within that space, allowing new types of innovations, new services like multi-mobility, where we can offer true end-to-end routes to a user based upon different types of transportation. So those 2 laws, with those 2 laws, the goal of the European Union is really to share data with respect for the GDPR legislation. And to do so, they will create new, fair, practical, and clear rules. And they want to make sure that every party in such a data space will talk the same language, and therefore we need standards. And next to those data spaces per sector, we will also have personal data spaces. And that's where Solid comes into the picture. So Solid is one of the initiatives to create a personal data space. Next to Solid, we have a number of different initiatives, but today we will be focusing on Solid because Solid is the most promising initiative to create a personal data space within Flanders especially. And SOLID stands for Social Linked Data, and basically is a set of existing technology standards to create a personal data vault. A personal data vault is a place where you will store all your data about you and created by you. And SOLID was invented by this smart guy who is the inventor of the internet. And he invented the internet in the early 90s as an open space where you can freely share information. But now he noticed that it's evolved to a place where data is stuck in those silos, as I mentioned earlier, and is also controlled by a number of large players. And therefore, he wants to fix the internet. And he wants to fix it by creating a decentralized project, which is SOLID. And what is SOLID exactly? The concept of SOLID evolves around personal data vault. It's a vault where you store all your personal information. And by storing all the information in one decentralized place, we can disconnect the application from the data itself. So, for example, take Spotify. Spotify today is an application which has a lot of data. Data created by me, my playlists, and data about me, my music preferences, for example. By disconnecting the music player and the data, I'm able to reuse that information. I can reuse my preferences with other applications. For example, maybe Netflix is interested in my preferences to notify me when there is a new documentary about some artist that I like. And with Spotify, the user will be in control. So the user will decide to which company will have access to my data vault, so to my preferences. So I can choose to share my data with, for example, Netflix, but not with Google. And Solid will even go further, which means that Solid is introducing contextual data sharing. Contextual data sharing means that we will not share the raw data itself. So for example, if I store information in my data vault, for example, my driver's license, and I want to create an account with Poppy to rent a car, I do not need to share my driver's license itself. Poppy can ask the data vault, does Sander have a driver's license? And they will get a yes or no back. And that is an advantage for the user because I do not have to share the picture on my driver's license or other information that Poppy does not need to have. I know how long and when they are accessing my data because it's stored in the pod and they will in the data vault and they will just ask one question. And for the company itself, it has also a lot of advantages because they do not need to store sensitive personal data itself, which today is a liability for those companies. And let's have a look at Solid today, because Solid, it's a new initiative. Where did it start? As I mentioned already, it was created by Tim Berners-Lee around 2015 by doing research at MIT. And EMEC and University of Ghent quickly joined the research. And that's why Flanders plays a really important role in the adoption of Solid. So we see it already during the research phase, but then around, I think, 2020, a proof of concept started around Solid, and again, Flanders is taking a big, is being a leader there, with the Flemish government launching Data Nutsbedrijf, data utility company, which is a company that will facilitate the data economy in Flanders by offering a free data vault to every citizen in Flanders later this year. And today, we notice that a lot of industry leading partner players, such as Microsoft, Philips, BBC, are creating real-life projects around Solid. But not only the industry is adopting Solid, we notice that the user is also ready to adopt the principle of data vaults. Because 70% of the users, according to the Solid Monitor, which is research that IMEC did last year in Flanders, 70% of citizens in Flanders is positive towards the idea, the concept of a personal data vault, and believes that in the future they will actually use a personal data vault. And even the concept of data vaults will help the citizen to regain control on their data. So they believe that by using data vaults, they can really regain control over their data and what is being done with their data. And it also helps with the perception of trust because according to the Solid Monitor, 61% believes that storing data in the data vault will actually be very safe to store your data in that vault. So the idea of a vault helps with the perception of trust for the citizen. And then if we have a look at, again, some numbers from the Digimeter, then we see that the citizen in general really is aware that personal data today is valuable, and the willingness to share data, there really is a relationship with the trust they have in an organization. And for example, citizens in Flanders would rather share data with hospital and insurance companies and banks and governments because they trust those organizations than, for example, a private company or startup. So the citizen in Flanders is really getting aware of what is data, data is valuable, and you need to consider to whom you will be sharing data. And the government is one of those parties, which brings me to the first solid use case that will be launched in a couple of weeks. So the use case is a case with Randstad and the Flemish government. So on the one hand, we have the Flemish government, who has today a database of all diplomas of Flemish citizens. On the other hand, we have Randstad, which struggles today with the verification of diplomas. Because today, if you graduate, you get a paper diploma, and then you want to apply for a job, which is online these days. So you have to take a picture or scan that diploma, send it to Randstad. There's a person at Randstad who manually look at the picture to see if it's a real diploma, but of course they do not know, so it's very sensitive to fraud. I believe that, I don't remember the number by heart, but a lot of people send fake diplomas to Randstad, by the way. So it's an actual problem, which costs a lot of money, a lot of time. And at the Flemish government, they have a database with all the information, but it's stuck in the database. So it's a silo and the data is stuck in it. So what's the project? As a citizen, you will be able to store your diploma in your personal vault. And when you apply for a job at Randstad, you can give Randstad access to that diploma for a certain period of time. So during your application, during the period of time where you apply for a job, Randstad can access your diploma. So as citizens, you're sure that after that period of time, Randstad does not have that data anymore. They will not call you in a couple of years to offer you a new job. And the advantage for Randstad is, of course, that they have the assurance that it's a valid diploma, it's actual data, and they get it in a digital way, so they can automatically validate it. There were a lot of challenges from a UX point of view in doing this project. So the first challenge is, of course, the introduction of the new concept of data vaults, where we had to choose, would we like to bring that concept to the front, or is it a concept that will happen in the background, and do we not need to bother the user with it? But also, during the customer flow, we have a lot of applications. There are a lot of parties. We have Mijn Burgerprofiel from the Flemish government. We have It's Me, for example, to authenticate. We have the application of Randstad, and the citizen has to do a lot of actions in those three applications. So it's a quite complex customer flow, and it's not that easy to make a seamlessly experience across those different applications. And third point is, of course, the balance between usability and legal requirements, because there's still a lot of legal requirements, and it's not always very easy to find the balance between the usability and the legal requirements. So let's have a look at the wireframes of this first use case. So the user will start at the website of Randstad. He will find a job for which he will apply for, and during the process of applying for that job, at a certain point he will need to provide his diploma, and he will be redirected to My Citizens profile. First, of course, he needs to authenticate. This can be done via It's Me or via one of the other options that the Flemish government is offering. And then they will end up within My Citizen profile, where he will be informed of the next steps. So first of all, we need to create that data vault, because today it's the first use case, so none of the citizens will have a data vault. And then, of course, we need to, every vault has a unique address. And Randstad needs to know that address, because they need to know where on the internet they can fetch the diploma. And the last step will be, of course, giving Randstad access to the specific data. And then, as you can see, a lot of consents need to be given. Those are the legal obligations. So first is the creation of the data vault. The second step is the unique address, and the third step is giving Randstad access to the data. Where in this case you can see that the user has multiple diplomas, and in this case we only want to provide access to one of the diploma. And then the user will be redirected to the application of Randstad, where he can complete his application form, and the user will at any time be able to revoke his consent or the access of Randstad. So within Mijn Burgerprofiel, Mijn Burgerprofiel has the role of a consent application. You will be able to view all the parties that have access to the data in your data vault, the period for which the party has access to the specific data, and then you can withdraw that access. So, as you probably noticed, it's already a quite complex user flow. And that's even for a simple use case from a solid point of view, because we have one POP provider, we have one data vault, the vault from the Flemish government. We have one consent application, Mijn Burgerprofiel, and in theory, there could be multiple parties offering a consent application. For example, in the future, we could have It's Me, which could also take up the role of consent application. So imagine what if a user has multiple vaults and uses multiple applications. The user flow will be much more complex than it is already. So with Solid, it's providing a lot of challenges from user experience, design point of view towards the future.
So we need a compass to explore and find our way to this whole new world that we are facing, and all those new challenges that we will have to deal with as a designer. All the legal requirements, all the legislations, but also all those different vaults, all those different interfaces of consent mechanisms whatsoever. And how can we just know in which direction we need to drive in this new era? And I came across a framework from the Danish Design Center, and it really appealed to me because I was thinking like, okay, this is what it is about. And it's really simple. It says, start with putting the human in the center, which we all do on a daily basis. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here in the UX community. So always start with the human in the center. And then think about the principles and honor those principles. So always give users control. So you also apply to the legislations. Make technology understandable to create really an inclusive world, an inclusive digital world. Avoid manipulating, so don't trick people in doing things they don't want to do, and avoid creating inequality. It means if you are designing a service, always think about the negative impact such a service could have. It's not always good for everyone when we are doing things. And then they apply it to three specific parts. It's data. If you are facing with data, apply those principles and think about what data are you collecting? Is it too much or not? Are you transparent about data? And are you complying with legislation? What about automation? Is it clear that a customer or a user is interacting with an automated solution? Is it transparent? Can he withdraw from it? And finally, think about behavioral design. Are we nudging our users for good, or are we trying to manipulate them in doing things they might not want to? And I think with this framework, we have some good principles at hand that we can use in every project that requires us to handle data and work around those new data vaults and those new consent mechanisms we are facing in the future. So I hope you are ready for this new era of digital trust.
Thanks both of you so much. That's a fascinating topic. I feel like I have 100 questions already. We're a bit out of time for questions though, so let's head off to the speakers during the break and afterwards. But I do want to hand you your official speakers badges. It's something that we've always done. I don't know why actually, but we just continue the tradition. It's a patch. You can put it on your biker jacket, you know, right below your heart. It's a patch. Every speaker gets one. So thank you very much, and we'll take a 15-minute break and come back at 8:10. I believe the toilets are that way. Yep. I don't know if there's more pizza, but there's definitely more drinks. So help yourself and see you back here.